morning, everyone. So thank you all for joining the Hong Kong Arts Administrators Association Cultural Leadership Summit 2020, Leveraging Technology for Growth. And I am Winton L. I'm the founder of 1 Month, 1 Art and the moderator of this session's 2A. During the presentation, participants may post questions in the Q&A box. We'll try to answer as many as possible. So during the talk and in the Q&A sessions later. And AAA will record this workshop. And other house rules, please refer to the event's webpage. In this session, we are very honored to have Chris Stanby to inspire us on the topic of better understanding audiences to maximize the long-term value of digital investment. Chris Stanby is the Chief Executive Officer and founder of the Advisory Board for the Arts, in short, ABA. So before establishing ABA, Chris was Executive Vice President at the Advisory Board Company, which is a global technology, best practice research, and consulting firm. Chris received his undergraduate degree in art history from George Washington University and a Master of Arts degree at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, and also an MBA at INSEAD. So Chris has 30 years of experiences in the business world, and altogether with 15 years of experiences in the arts and non-profit sector. In arts, has been the chairman of the board of the Washington Chorus, and also the chairman of Post-Classical Ensemble. He's also on the board of the Oslo International Arts Festival, among many others. Chris is trilingual in English, French, and Italian. And today, Chris is going to speak to us in English. He's a very good skier, a food enthusiast, and also a traveler. But too bad we cannot bring Chris to Hong Kong today to enjoy our exotic food like chicken feet, perhaps next time. But thanks to technology, so we can still have Chris with us here virtually, and despite 12 hours time difference. So please join me to welcome Chris Stanby, that he will show us how to leverage technology even further. So Chris.
Thank you very much, Winton. It's such an honor to be here, and I'm very relieved that you said I would be speaking in English today as opposed to any languages, because that's what I was planning to do. So that's a thrill. I do very much wish I were in Hong Kong and having some chicken at Madame Phu's, and I was last there in January of last year, and boy, I really dearly wish I could be there right now, but hope to be invited again in the future. It is such an honor and a pleasure to be with all of you today, and to be sharing some of our work with you across these 90 minutes. To all of you who are joining us here, thank you for spending these 90 minutes here with us, and I hope you will find it helpful and instructive to all of the work that you are doing in the field of the arts. I want to thank Winton and the entire team from the Hong Kong Arts Administrators Association for this invitation, for all their hard work putting this incredible summit together. It is extraordinary and unprecedented, and I compliment them for everything that they've done across these last few days, and will continue to do. Hopefully at this point, Winton, everybody can see my screen and my different slides. Please let me know if there are any difficulties with video or audio as we go along. A few ground rules for this time together. I'm going to cover a lot of material, and yet the material I'm going to cover will only begin to scratch the surface of the topic. And so for all of you listening in here and watching this from your different locations, please don't hesitate to ask questions as we go along. You can do so in the chat room, or you can do so in the Q&A function, and we will stop every once in a while and try to take a few questions. Please don't be frustrated if we don't get to your questions by the end of the session. I will at multiple times give you my email address, and I will encourage you to contact me directly. If we haven't covered a question in this session, please, please, please do not hesitate to write to me. We love to answer questions, and we love to engage in them, and I hope you will do so as well. I believe we are recording this session, and that both the recording of the session and the slides will be made available to all participants subsequently. So here we go. We are going to talk now about technology and the arts, and specifically and when it comes to technology and audiences. The Advisory Board for the Arts is a very young company. We just got going. In fact, we just crossed our 1-year anniversary. And yet, even though we are new, we are really not new. And what I mean by that is that those of us who decided to start this company have come from a long history of predecessor organizations that have really fueled our interest in data, technology, and how it can impact an industry. Specifically, before the Advisory Board for the Arts, there were 3 other companies that were founded on its same model over the course of the last 40 years. The first, the Corporate Executive Board, serving largely corporations, but then serving a series of nonprofit sectors, most notably at the Advisory Board company, the healthcare industry all over the world, and then a little bit later, education through the Education Advisory Board. So the Advisory Board for the Arts takes the model that has been built in other industries and brings it to the world of the arts. One of the things that we learned as we worked with institutions in healthcare and in education is the power of technology to really transform industries that have been relatively stagnant for a long time, that have not seen a lot of innovation, that have not seen a lot of disruption. Every corner of the globe has seen the impact that technology has had on healthcare, the impact that technology has had on how we learn in education. And I think one of the reasons that we started the Advisory Board for the Arts was to bring that kind of disruptive thinking to the arts on a global basis. It is very important to us that the ideas that we bring to the table are completely new and different in kind compared to what we have been used to seeing over the years, over the decades in the arts. In fact, let me spend 2 minutes on our main principles at the Advisory Board for the Arts, because I think they will help you understand where we're coming from when it comes to big data and technology. Our interest in working with arts organizations is in brokering ideas across every sector of the arts, across every geography, and outside of the arts as well. A lot of the research that we've been doing, particularly on the topic of data, technology, and audiences, comes from outside of the world of the arts. And you'll see a lot of that this morning as we go through this presentation. That is why we have such a big focus on this. It is because our interest is in brokering ideas across geographies, across art forms, and from outside of the world of the arts. What do we work on? What is our field of interest? Basically, anything that is of greatest importance to an arts organization. So as we talk to arts leaders literally all over the world, we're talking about the themes that are important to them: cost pressures, competitive pressures, revenue, demographic pressures. We will talk a lot about demographic pressures today because it has to do with audiences. And of course, right now, what is of greatest importance to everyone is surviving the pandemic, is thinking about how arts organizations are going to make it through this horrific period, really transformative in nature. A lot of what this has forced us to do is to think about the role of digital. And what is the intersection between technology, data, digital, audiences, and the arts? So we'll talk a lot about that today, and hopefully you'll find some very new ideas when it comes to all of that. We are very blessed already in our first year to work with organizations all over the world. We work on a membership model. Organizations join the Advisory Board for the Arts to have access to our work. And we work with organizations in 11 different countries, on 4 different continents, already just in this past year of our existence. And we are hoping to grow much, much more across these next few years as we work with more and more arts organizations. You can see here some of what we work on, the issues, what we're doing right now to help arts organizations all over the world. You can see in the yellow dots the locations of some of the organizations that we work with. It is really important to us that we be perceived as global in nature, that our ideas be global. When you hear me talk today about data sources and information, it will be with a lens towards case studies, stories, data that comes from a variety of different places around the world. And we believe that the ideas that we are presenting today are relevant anywhere, regardless of whether you are in Hong Kong, in Tokyo, in Melbourne, in Paris, in Washington, DC, so on and so forth. So please challenge me on that. And hopefully we'll have a dialogue, maybe perhaps after this presentation through email or other means, about the relevance of some of these ideas. I'm going to jump into the material here in a second, but if you want to learn more about what we're doing, how we're doing it, our methods, please go to our website, advisoryarts.com. It's very simple, advisoryarts.com. You'll find a lot of completely free resources there for all of you. We are organized around topic areas. You will see centers that we've created around audience engagement, around digital arts and culture, around arts resilience, which has to do specifically with the pandemic. We've been doing a series of free webinars with participants from all over the world. All these webinars are available for free for you on our website if you're interested. And of particular relevance, the very last one that we did on July 22nd is on creating connectivity for audiences during the pandemic, during closure, which will have a direct relevance to what we're talking about today. So consider that a resource as well. I mentioned that I really hope you will all communicate with me, and I mean that. This is my email address, chris.denby@advisoryarts.com. Please email me during this presentation if you want, afterwards. Ask me any questions you want on anything that is relevant to you, on anything that we don't get to today together. So what are we going to talk about? I mentioned the variety of issues that we have been working with our members on over the past 6 to 12 months. We're going to focus specifically today on the 4 that are in red today, in red on this particular slide. We're going to talk about customer experience. What are our audiences experiencing and how can you innovate that? We're going to talk about how we understand audiences better. We're going to talk about groundbreaking strategies for attracting audiences in different ways. And of course, we're going to talk about the role of digital and streaming in all of that. So I wanted to give you a grounding into which of the many things we work on we're going to talk about today specifically. Everything is about audience in what we're going to discuss. Why? Well, one of the reasons is, if you put it in the parlance of any other industry, the customer is king, right? And sometimes we hear the word customer in the world of the arts, and it feels like, do I like that word? Is that an okay word to use when it comes to the arts? I think it is, because it helps us think differently about who we are trying to attract to our museums, to our dance performances, to our opera companies, so on and so forth. They need to be thought of in different and kind ways in order for us to be able to create different strategies and experiences to kind of disrupt what we've been doing forever. We've been talking to all of you, to arts leaders from across the globe for the better part of 2 years now, hundreds of leaders, asking them, what is important to you? And we have found over 80 really important topics that arts leaders talk to us about. But what are the ones that they say are most important? By far, as you can tell here, the topic of greatest interest to arts leaders all over the world is how do you achieve sustainable audience growth? I'm here to tell you that it can be done and that technology and data is the key to achieving sustainable audience growth. You can see in red other related topics: best practices in building next generation audiences. How do you create customer loyalty going forward? How do you innovate in your understanding of audiences? Those are all the things that you, arts leaders, have told us are critical to your future. And that's why we have spent so much of our time on this in our first year of existence, bringing ideas from all sorts of different industries and all sorts of different places from around the world. So today we're going to talk about 3 specific things pertaining to this issue of audiences and how do you innovate thinking about audiences and the future growth of audiences in the world of the arts. Very briefly, a reminder of the crisis that we're living in. But then we're going to migrate to this question of using motivations to build future audiences. And I'll be very clear in a few minutes about what do I mean by that, because that is the future. That is where data comes in to better target, and create experiences and strategies to have sustainable long-term growth. But it's not just about the long term. We believe a lot of this theory, a lot of the data and technology can be valuable to us right now during this pandemic as we are all navigating how to reach people when we don't have the same ability to be live with them. And it will be even in the most, forward places in the world in terms of ability to reopen, it will still be a while before we're completely back to where we were before. So that's what we're going to talk about. So first, a little bit of context. What's been happening in the arts over the last few decades? One of the reasons we started this company is because we've been concerned. Again, wherever you are in the world, there is a graphic that looks a little bit like this. And we were talking about demographics earlier. There is unfortunately an overall reduction in interest in the arts compared to the past. This is US data here, looking over a 2-decade period. It's a little bit old, but clearly all of the trend lines are unfortunately still the same. It shows both a dramatic decrease in interest in different art forms over the course of multiple decades, but also a fairly concerning low percentage of interest overall in different art forms. How do we reverse that? How do we create a more vibrant future where these lines are positive, not negative? That's what we're interested in. And we think to achieve that, we're going to have to think very differently than we have up until now. These trend lines and these concerns are obviously magnified by what we've been going through this year. The pandemic has unfortunately accelerated some of these things. I'm going to come back to this data a little bit later on in the presentation, but I want to focus you on one point. This is actually major survey of over 100,000 arts patrons, asking them, what have you been missing over the last few months? And look at what is not at the top of the list. Experiencing artworks, performances, or specific performers in person. Kind of middle to low in the list of things that they've actually been missing. And this is not general population. These are people who are self-described arts lovers. So what is this pandemic doing to their interest in the arts? And what, again, can we reverse, and how can we reverse that? What is the role of an arts organization in reversing that trend line? Let me stop with the bad news. The good news is we believe that there is the potential to reverse that, and that there is actually an enormous potential to reach out to audiences all over the world to increase the interest level in the arts. Here's one data point, more as an example than anything definitive, that we thought we wanted to share with you to give you a little bit of optimism. This is a study that was done in the United States a few years ago that looked at the propensity of individuals to visit cultural organizations of all types. It includes zoos and theaters and so on, and museums and so on and so forth. The point of this is that the finding was that, generally speaking, about 15% of a population, whether it's a national population or a city's population, tends to be the customer base for an arts organization, sort of the regulars. But what they have found is that, in effect, there is an inactive ring around that active ring of another 15%. Of people who are predisposed to be interested in having a propensity to visit cultural organizations, but for whatever reason, do it rather seldom, maybe once a year or once every 2 years. The question is, how do we motivate these individuals, these inactive visitors, to come to our arts organization? But here's the good news. It's 15%, but that 15% is a doubling of the traditional audience, the traditional target market that we go after in any of our cities, countries, regions, so on and so forth. In other words, the interpretation here is there is at least a doubling in the potential market. The question is, how do we get to these individuals? How do we convince them to become active from being inactive? That's where technology comes in. That's where data comes in. And the key, as you will hear from me all morning long, is on the right. We must find the motivations that drive sustained attendance for visitors we would like to attract. That 15% of inactive visitors, we need to understand everything about them. Because the more we understand about them, the more we can design strategies that will convince them to become new and loyal customers to our arts organizations. That is our objective through all this work. So where does data come into this? In order to do this, we have had to leverage a great number of data sources, not just one. And I'm going to quickly introduce a few of them here. We have forged a number of collaborations internationally with organizations that have helped us. One is with an organization called Haystack DNA, which has never done work before in the arts. And we brought them to the arts world from the world of political campaigns, believe it or not. And we'll talk a little bit about the relevance of political campaigns to the world of the arts in a few minutes. We have partnered with organizations like Slover Lynette and LaPlaca Cohen to do major market study research that we will bring to bear. And we have done our own, of course, independent firsthand research, speaking to arts lovers, studying arts lovers, really going extremely deep, using techniques from outside of the world of the arts to better understand what truly motivates them, better than they can articulate it themselves. And I will come back to that really important difference in a minute. So as I said, we're now going to turn our attention to that long-term ambition, the potential doubling of the target market that any arts organization can go after with better data, better technology, better understanding of the audience. Let me start by giving you one example of an organization that did something fairly advanced for the world of the arts in terms of achieving a better understanding of their customer. So with that, let us travel together to Amsterdam. And specifically, we're going to talk about the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. One of the most visited museums, certainly in Amsterdam, one of the most visited museums in the world. They were very interested in breaking the mold when it came to defining and understanding who came to their museum and what are they really like as people. They partnered with a firm in the United Kingdom called Franklin Green and Webb, and they quickly started to study, and I really mean study, the people who were coming into their museums. This is not the stuff of, well, let me have you fill out a survey. This is deep psychological understanding of what was motivating them. Why did they go see that painting? Why did they stop there? How did they move through the museum? All those different things that provide a completely different layer of understanding as to what they were. What they referred to, what they were doing was investigating the humans. They almost were detectives trying to better understand audience members. And I want to play a short video here, about 4 minutes, about a presentation that was given by somebody from Franklin Green and Webb about what they did. Because you'll see that they ended up focusing on one linchpin component of the user experience in the museum, which was the user guide, the audio guide that they were using. And they completely revamped the use of the audio guide in order to change the user experience based on that investigation of the humans that they did. So let's take a minute and listen to this. Think about what is different in terms of what you're hearing right now. What is different compared to the typical understanding of an audience member, of a customer?
We talk to visitors about their experiences at the Van Gogh Museum and elsewhere. And we didn't ask them if they liked our ideas. We didn't ask them what we should give them. We asked them what they did, when and why. We asked them what mattered to them, and when they'd had their best experiences. In other words, we used visitors as expert witnesses in their own experiences. And their thoughts and their feelings, and we then used insights from that and those from the branding work as well to inform the design decisions. So let's look just at one aspect of this. So the research, both from the branding team and our own, showed that our target audience were very young. The average age of the visitor to the Van Gogh Museum is 32. They are not frequent museum goers, and as Ebeline alluded to, they really don't like anything that looks like hard work. They've probably got a hangover. They think they know Van Gogh. They want to get closer to him as a person, not particularly as an artist. They don't know much about art. And I suppose despite our fears, they don't dislike guides. They have absolutely no idea what a guide's like. And that learning was a real challenge to a lot of assumptions in the whole project team. I think there was an assumption that visitors were more likely to take a guide that offered more. So that'd be more content, more personalization, more features, more depth and choice. And it was also a challenge to the curators, who felt that their real desire was that visitors would understand Van Gogh better, and that they wouldn't think that he's this crazy guy who painted the sunflowers and chopped his ear off, and it was all about mental anguish. But the really interesting thing was that challenge, the difference between the visitor and the internal desires, turned out to be the fuel for the development of the central concept and a very detailed and rigorous content strategy. Instead of, for example, the curators and the education team asking comms and marketing to apply a brand coating to their ideas, or Marcom coming to education and saying, can you fill our idea with content? We worked as a group together and we asked, what would it take to bridge that gap? What is the core idea for that experience? And the visitor research was a really powerful tool in this. We used it to identify the bright spots that were happening already, a moment that worked really well for both visitors and the museum. And we realized that what often gave them the greatest delight and understanding was the moment when their preconceptions were flipped. The moment had this incredible emotional and intellectual power for visitors that really engaged them. And it was from this that we developed the central idea. And that is that the guide will reveal a Van Gogh you never knew. And once we had identified that opportunity, it became a matter of how we would roll it out in every facet of the service, and we could all pull in the same direction.
So I'm curious as to what you pulled away from that. And by the way, feel free to use the chat function to communicate with each other, to put in observations about what you're hearing, and to, again, ask questions within, again, the Q&A function here or the chat room. Here are some of the things I took away from this particular story that I found was particularly fascinating in terms of what they did there. I think that this idea of observing the customer through a different lens is interesting. Think about, at least in the English language, we call it expert witnesses. People, think about the customer as the expert witness. Again, don't expect they'll be able to necessarily articulate the answers to the questions. And so you have to think about, how am I going to get something different out of this particular person when I talk to them about their experience? You need to create a completely deeper profile than you're used to about the typical visitor or audience member. You need to be willing to completely suspend disbelief, reopen your assumptions about who your audience members, who your customers are. And by doing that, you're going to be able to create a new understanding of the customer and therefore restructure experiences such as the visitor guide around that new understanding of who they are. So we were very impressed with what they did there in this particular instance, and the Van Gogh Museum has done a lot of really impressive things. And if you're interested in learning more, we did a profile, for instance, of their particular education program through the pandemic, which they called Museum from Home. We have a weekly newsletter, which you're welcome to subscribe to. Anybody can. You'll see it on our website. But also there in our education center, within our topic centers, you will find the profile of what the Van Gogh Museum did in terms of building this museum at home. Really interesting example of a digital program entirely newly designed during the pandemic. The point is here with this story, and the reason I wanted to start is that as impressive as the example was of what they did, we believe we've got to go much further than that, much further even than what the Van Gogh Museum did. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what that means, and the approach that I want to talk about with you, and the one that we've been working on for the past year, has to do with a completely new breakthrough understanding of what motivates customers, or as in other industries, we call them buyers. It is unbelievable the degree of sophistication that other industries have in the understanding of their buyers. Other industries understand me as a customer much more than I understand myself, right? And so how do we get to that same degree of sophistication in the world of the arts? Our interest is who are the most likely new loyals, right? I talked earlier about this notion of our goal is to identify new customers, new audience members, new visitors, but not just new ones, new loyal ones, that will come and stay for years and years to come. Because what we need to build is the next generation of arts lovers, right? Not necessarily here. Our focus here is not the current ones who come, trying to get them to come more frequently. This is about the future, and the future of this art form. We want to talk about what breakthrough strategies can then be designed based on that understanding of these new loyal customers. I'm going to turn now to a little bit of the details of where the data comes from, where the analytics come from. There's an excellent question from one of our participants around the cost of doing some of these things. And I can, without going into too much detail, you don't have to be the Van Gogh Museum to do this. I guarantee you. You can be a museum, a performing arts center, a chamber orchestra with a staff of 5 people and still do this. I won't necessarily get into the details of it right now. It does not at all require a massive budget, and many aspects of this can be done in a very simple fashion. Now, you can be extraordinarily sophisticated and, from a budget standpoint, but you don't have to be. And again, we can talk about that more offline. So one of the things that you have to do, and that we introduced here, is this partnership we've talked about with this firm, Haystack DNA. Now, Haystack DNA came to fame by being the data partners to Barack Obama during his first presidential campaign. And they brought a concept to the table that is often credited as one of the key reasons that President Obama won his first campaign. They brought the concept of predictive analytics to the approach to potential voters. And to keep it extremely simple for right now, what they did, or the theory that they applied to that particular political campaign, was the following. If you have 100 people in a room and I'm a candidate, not everybody in this room has the potential to vote for me, right? There are going to be some people who, no matter what I do, will never vote for me. There are some other people at the other end of the spectrum who have characteristics that make them much more likely to be convinced. They're not convinced yet, but they're much more likely to be convinced. Think about how much more effective I can be if I'm speaking to those 27 people and not to the 100. If I'm spending my limited funds convincing those 27 people who are most likely to come vote for me, as opposed to trying to convince all 100. I can understand those 27 people much more specifically. I can speak to them individually. I can create strategies targeted to those 27, and I'm much more likely to be successful and therefore have a higher return on investment. That is what we wanted to bring to the arts. When an arts organization is trying to target a population, don't try to target the entire population to come to your performance. 72% of that population will never come no matter what you do. So how do you identify who those people are, and how do you better understand them so that your investments in targeting that new population can be more successful and more effective? So let's turn now to what do we typically know about the people that we go after to try to convince them to come back to our performances, right? So I'm going to introduce a lady by the name of Ilyana. We invented her, and talk about the fact that typically when an arts organization is trying to get Ilyana to come to an exhibit or to come to see a dance performance, we know that Ilyana is 35. We probably or could know her income level. We might know her education level. And we might even know that she has previously purchased tickets to certain things, how long it's been since she's purchased tickets. We might even know a little bit about her interests and her attitudes. But that's kind of it, if we're lucky. Again, using the benchmark of other industries, this would be child's play for other industries. That would be 1% of the level of understanding that another sector of the economy would know about Ilyana. So how can we possibly be successful when we need to achieve 10 times more of an understanding of Ilyana than we typically do? To do that, we are introducing a concept that, again, has been used in many other industries previously, called jobs to be done. Now, we sent around some initial pre-read, which some of you might have had the time to take a look at. It doesn't matter too much. You feel free to read it afterwards if you haven't had a chance to. This concept was developed and pioneered by a professor at Harvard Business School named Clayton Christensen. Now, he pioneered and coined the term jobs to be done. And his belief here, as he defined this concept, look at the part in the center here in bold, a job is the progress that a customer is trying to make in a given circumstance. So what does that mean? That means that, for instance, when you go to a hardware store, you don't really buy a 1/4-inch drill. You're buying the job that you want that 1/4-inch drill to do. And that job is to make a 1/4-inch hole. So again, defining the job by the objective that you're trying to accomplish, as opposed to the means by which you are accomplishing it. To give you a kind of a fun way of thinking about this concept, I want to play another video about 4 or 5 minutes long as well. You'll hear Professor Christensen talk about the application of this concept to something that McDonald's hired him to do a number of years ago. Take a look at this. I think it'll give you a much better understanding of what we're talking about.
We decided that the way we teach marketing is at the core of what makes motivation difficult to achieve. The most helpful way we've thought of it is that we actually hire products to do things for us. And understanding what job we have to do in our lives for which we would hire a product is really the key to cracking this problem of motivating customers to buy what we're offering. So I wanted just to tell you a story about a project we did for one of the big fast food restaurants. They were trying to goose up the sales of their milkshakes. They had just studied this problem up the gazoo. They brought in customers who fit the profile of the quintessential milkshake consumer. They'd give them samples and ask, could you tell us how we can improve our milkshakes so you'd buy more of them? Do you want it chocolatey or cheaper, chunky or chewier? They get very clear feedback. They would then improve the milkshake on those dimensions, and it had no impact on sales or profits whatsoever. So one of our colleagues went in with a different question on his mind, and that was, I wonder what job arises in people's lives that cause them to come to this restaurant to hire a milkshake. So we stood in a restaurant for 18 hours one day and just took very careful data. What time did they buy these milkshakes? What were they wearing? Were they alone? Did they buy other food with it? Did they eat it in the restaurant or drive off with it? It turned out that nearly half of the milkshakes were sold before 8 o'clock in the morning. The people who bought them were always alone. It was the only thing they bought, and they all got in the car and drove off with it. So to figure out what job they were trying to hire it to do, we came back the next day and stood outside the restaurant so we could confront these folks as they left, milkshake in hand. And in language that they could understand, we essentially asked, excuse me, please, but I got to sort this puzzle out. What job were you trying to do for yourself that caused you to come here and hire that milkshake? And they'd struggle to answer, so we'd then help them by asking other questions like, well, think about the last time you were in the same situation, needing to get the same job done, but you didn't come here to hire a milkshake. What did you hire? And then as we put all of their answers together, it became clear that they all had the same job to do in the morning, and that is they had a long and boring drive to work. And they just needed something to do while they drove to keep the commute interesting. One hand had to be on the wheel, but somebody had given them another hand and there wasn't anything in it. And they just needed something to do while they drove. They weren't hungry yet, but they knew they'd be hungry by 10 o'clock. So they also wanted something that would just go down there and stay for that morning. Good question. What do I hire when I do this job? You know, I've never framed the question that way before, but last Friday I hired a banana to do the job. Take my word for it, never hire bananas. They're gone in 3 minutes. You're hungry by 7:30. If you promise not to tell my wife, I probably hire donuts twice a week, but they don't do it well either. They're gone fast. They crumb all over my clothes. They get my fingers gooey. Sometimes I hire bagels, but as you know, they're so dry and tasteless. Then I have to steer the car with my knees while I'm putting jam on them, and then if the phone rings, we got a crisis. I remember I hired a Snickers bar once, but I felt so guilty I've never hired Snickers again. Let me tell you, when I come here and hire this milkshake, it is so viscous that it easily takes me 20 minutes to suck it up that thin little straw. Who cares what the ingredients are? I don't. All I know is I'm full all morning and it fits right here in my cup holder. Well, it turns out that the milkshake does the job better than any of the competitors, which in the customer's minds are not Burger King milkshakes, but it's bananas, donuts, bagels, Snickers bars, coffee, and so on. But I hope you can see how, if you understand the job, how to improve the product becomes just obvious.
Think about that last statement. If you understand the job, think about how much easier it is to improve the product. That's what we're after here. So we went about that task of taking the theories of Clayton Christensen and Jobs to be Done, which has been so helpful to so many other industries and corporations, and started to ask, what jobs are arts patrons hiring arts organizations and firing arts organizations to do? What are those jobs? What is that different in kind level of understanding as to what they are hiring to do? So just like Clayton did with other industries, just like he did sitting around outside of McDonald's trying to really kind of dig deep into those motivations, we did the same thing with arts patrons all over the world. And we asked them the same kind of really critical and very nuanced questions that would give us an understanding that they didn't have, right? Because the key here is you can't ask people, so what motivated you to buy that ticket? They won't tell you, they won't know. So you have to figure out how to ask those questions in a way to extract an understanding that even they don't have. So let's tell you a little bit about what we learned in that process. These are 4 of the individuals that we analyzed deeply. We investigated. You remember the concept of investigating the humans. We did that, just putting 4 here as an example. These are all real names and faces disguised. Typically, what we would know about Min, Scott, Karima, Ilse are the things in the first row, right? Their age group, perhaps their ethnic background, their demographics, so on and so forth. But what are the jobs that we heard them articulate? Well, with Min, it was the job I'm hiring this ballet company to do is that I want to support community cultural institutions. That's the thing that really motivates me to go to the ballet. Scott, on the other hand, the job that he was hiring the arts organization to do was to carry on a family tradition. He wouldn't necessarily himself, on his own time and motivation, buy a ticket to that opera or go to that museum, but it's what his family always did for generations. It's what he did when he was a kid, and he wanted to carry on that tradition. That was his primary motivator. Karima, on the other hand, thought about it more as a cultural rite of passage. None of these jobs were about, I bought it because I want to hear Beethoven's Ninth, or I bought it because I want to see Nutcracker, or I bought it because I want to see that Kusama exhibit. The job is different. The motivation that at the end of the day really drove that person to purchase that ticket is different in kind. And really what makes it come alive is a critical element of what we talked to them about, which is if you hadn't purchased that particular ticket, what in your mind would have constituted a substitute, an alternative? Again, in other industries, this concept of studying substitutes happens all the time because it's very revealing as to the customer's mentality. So look at Ilse, who said that her primary job was to have a transformative experience. What was her substitute? Not going to the museum instead of the opera, not going to Mozart instead of Beethoven. It was, I guess I could have gone to work at a dog shelter for a day. That was the substitute in her mind to that art ticket. Or in the case of Min, it was joining a hiking club. Or in the case of Scott, it would be holiday gatherings. Suddenly, when you think about the customer's motivations in those terms, it gives you a completely different perspective on what is motivating them, and therefore a different perspective on how you should be designing your product, excuse the word, what it is that you're trying to get them to enjoy, that play, that exhibit, that experience at the zoo or whatever it might be. It's a completely new way of thinking about it. So it's complex. There's not one job, 2 jobs, 3 jobs. There are a lot of jobs that we've uncovered. And let me give you a little bit of an orientation as to that. But before I do that, again, a reminder, please don't hesitate to ask me questions as we go along. put them into the chat room, the Q&A function, and I'll do my best to address them. I know we're covering a lot of material really quickly here, but don't hesitate to ask questions again, or to share perspectives with others who are joining here. We have a very large group today. So what are these jobs? These are the jobs that we uncovered. And there's, as you can tell, quite a number of them. What's interesting is if you array these jobs on a spectrum, there are certain jobs that are deeply connected to what is happening on stage or in the museum. But then there are a lot of jobs that are not, that are much more tangentially related to the actual art form that is being presented. Clearly, if you look at the top left, you see that one of the jobs is the one that we probably focus on the most. We make it our mission to create art performed at the highest level. But interestingly, that's only one of the many, many, many jobs that are motivating people to go to arts organizations. And where big data then marries this very customized understanding of the jobs is that you cannot assume that a potential new audience member is only attached to one of these jobs. That is where big data comes into the picture. And what we've been working on for the last 6 months is to understand through an analysis of thousands of arts buyers, how these jobs connect into what we're calling clusters, and to create a new understanding of what are the jobs to be done based clusters that describe the potential new loyal customers. This is what these clusters might look like. This is, let me be very clear, this is not the answer, this is not the result of the analysis. I'm just providing you a hypothetical so that you can understand the concept of what these clusters look like. We're going to be unveiling the results of this to our members in October, so very soon now. I see that somebody raised their hand. I would appreciate it if, because it's hard to have audio, if you do have a question, again, please just type it into the chat room or the Q&A, and we'll try to deal with it that way. So the concept of clusters is using machine learning and predictive analytics, the way that Haystack DNA worked with us, to process all of the information from thousands and thousands of respondents and arts lovers to say, what are the statistically significant clusters that describe the different types of arts purchasers? This can be done on the national level, but it also can be done at a single arts organization level. And what's fascinating is that you can then see what is unique about your own organization as compared to general populations in various parts of the world. Most importantly, you can size these clusters. The fact that they are of different sizes here is extraordinarily important, because suddenly you can say that, wow, I should really be focusing my efforts on cluster number 5 because it's so much bigger than cluster number 6. So although in theory, I love people who just want to have fun and want to be part of defining a cultural moment, but if I really want to expand my audience, I should be focusing on cluster 5, which are people that have the following jobs to be done. They want to pass on a tradition. They want to teach children cultural literacy. They want to connect with family. So again, let me re-emphasize, this is hypothetical, what I'm showing you here. This is a theoretical depiction of what our answer will be when we do this in October. But it is meant to show you the power of what we're talking about. And let me make it come alive here. Let me reintroduce the person that we met a few minutes ago, Ileana. But this is a completely new Ileana. We now understand Ileana in a very different way than we did a few minutes ago. Remember before, We only knew her as the person who was 35 years old, who maybe had a middle-class income. Maybe we knew that she was the children of immigrants. But what we now know that is so much more useful is what is the job that she is hiring an arts organization to fulfill for her, or more importantly, the jobs plural. And you would discover that Ileana is actually part of a cluster that we're calling arts initiates. And the 3 jobs that are part of that cluster: enrich myself in a new field, experience a rite of passage, and earn entry into society or class. Now, why is this so powerful? Because if you know that Ileana is part of a cluster that has those 3 jobs, and that this is a big enough cluster in your market for you to go after, you can redesign everything you do around that understanding, right? Just like McDonald's did with the milkshakes, you can redesign literally every aspect: how you target your audience, how you message to your audience, what is the purchasing experience, how do you prepare your audience to come to your organization, the experience itself in the moment, and finally, the follow-up that happens when Ileana leaves and goes back home. All the strategies can then be designed based on that completely breakthrough understanding of who Ileana is versus the hypothetical understanding of who she might be and what would be motivating her, largely based on demographics. And then finally, the most cool thing about it of all is that these strategies, of which we've put in just a couple of examples below here, you can actually measure them. And you can now know that doing these things will have a return on investment, as opposed to assuming that it will or hypothesizing that it will. And you know that because you've created that strategy, that tactic, that investment to meet a particular segment that you know will respond to that strategy and you know is big enough to be worth that investment. So suddenly you have an ability to measure the results and the impact of the strategies that you're putting in place to target the customers that you're looking for. Behind the scenes, if you pull away the curtain, a lot of what is going on here has to do with the theory of micro-targeting. And I introduced this theory a few minutes ago with this very basic concept of, in a room of 100, who are the ones in that room who are most likely to be your customers? Because those are the ones you want to understand, you want to know who they are, and you want to design strategies for those people. That is micro-targeting. And what we've laid out here are the different steps associated with micro-targeting and how we have been working with that micro-targeting theory to create an understanding and strategies that will help arts organizations have a completely breakthrough way of creating strategies to significantly expand their audience base. To make this real, we have then created a tool to bring all of this together. And I will caution everyone here before I go into this, that there are many aspects of what I'm talking about that can or cannot be done based on particular data laws and privacy laws, depending on which countries you're in. So as we work with members in France or the United States or in Hong Kong or in Australia, different parts of this can be applied in different ways, depending on what the specific restrictions are and specific guidelines are in terms of privacy laws. They're different from one country to the next. So not every aspect of this is going to be potentially possible in every place, but the vast majority of what I've been talking about can and should be applicable in theory to any market. Specifically, how we design a new understanding of customers and then target strategies to that new understanding of who they are and the jobs to be done theory. With that as preamble and cautionary note, let me talk to you a little bit about this tool that we've been building. We're calling it Arts 360. It brings everything together. We're using a hypothetical example here to talk to you about the power of data in the ability to target customers and audiences. We're assuming here that a theater company in Washington, D.C., it's a real theater company, it's called Arena Stage, it's one of the prestigious theater companies in Washington, D.C., wants to design a strategy to target a particular demographic within their area that their board has said is really important. And we're here talking about the Latin American population, which is obviously a big interest here. So the question is, if you're Arena Stage and you want to, and you've set as your strategy to increase that particular population segment amongst your audience, how would you do that? Well, again, this Arts 360 tool would allow you in theory to look into your market. This is Washington, D.C. here. Every black dot you see is one individual or household that has purchased at least one ticket to Arena Stage at some point in the last 10 years or so. So you suddenly have an understanding of the geographic spread of all these people, but you have combined several data sets, including consumer data sets, to then have a huge amount of information about these individuals. You can immediately say, okay, show me all the people who fit the demographics that I'm interested in, the Latinx demographics. You can see what countries they're coming from, their ethnic groups, you know, so on and so forth. Again, as I said before, this is just an example that is relevant to this market. How you would identify what it is you're interested in would be very different for cultural reasons, for legal reasons, and so on and so forth in a number of different markets. This is a hypothetical example of one of the things that you can do with a much deeper data set and ability to understand your customers. Once you're able to identify a particular market segment, such as this one, you're then able to take this tool and literally go down to a particular house on a map and say, so in that house, we have 3 customers who've purchased tickets, and they have the following characteristics that are seen here. What I'm interested in is I want to design a strategy where I can find influencers in this particular segment, because I want to convince that particular influencer to come to me and to then convince other people within that segment to also come to my organization. And I want to say that the characteristic that I'm most interested in is, let's say, high net worth, because that way potentially that person can become a donor as well to my organization. So you look into this to say, well, which individuals have the potential to have that high net worth that could actually be an influencer within that particular segment that I'm targeting. You literally can then go down and say, here she is. Her name is Marta Figueroa. And this is where we go back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, because it's not enough to know that Marta Figueroa could be that influencer who would help us increase the audience members around that particular segment definition. Because normally all I would know about Marta, despite all this data set, is she's 54 years old, she's of this particular demographic, she has high net worth. But now I know something else about her. I know which cluster she belongs to. I know that she's cluster 4, and that she hires an arts organization to fulfill 4 specific jobs to be done: to act as a role model for others, to keep the arts healthy in my region, to enable arts as the conscience of society, and to feel good about her role in the community. Now pause on that for a second. She probably can't articulate those things about herself, but you can, because you've done the analysis. You know that those are in fact deep down the motivators, and you can design strategies to have a conversation with Marta to convince her to come to your organization, to become involved based on those particular elements that you know about her. So there was a question here about practical examples, and I think I just went through one practical example of how you can literally find a single person that could be a linchpin to your strategy to build audiences, and how you might then design strategies to work with that individual person to be able to convince her to become a supporter of what it is you're trying to do, a strategic supporter. But of course, this level of understanding, this tool, this use of data can be applied in a million different ways. In the interest of time, I'm going to move us forward here because there's so much more I'd want to tell you about this, but I do want to talk about the here and now. I think as I move now to this next section where I've introduced you to some of the concepts and ways in which data can be used differently to build long-term growth amongst audiences, I've also told you that there's the opportunity to do so in the short term, to leverage some of this information and theories to help us during this pandemic period, help us with new insight as to what people want, what they miss, and what we as arts organizations can do. Before I move to this, I want to take a couple of the questions that have come through, and thank you for asking these questions. And again, a reminder, please keep sending them. And if for some reason we don't get to them or you have more questions, email me, chris.denby@advisoryarts.com. Do not hesitate. I will answer you. There's a question around the frequency of doing jobs to be done. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. In general, you do not need to do it very frequently at all. In theory, these jobs to be done do not change dramatically, except in one condition, exactly what's happened this year. And I'll talk about it now because that has created a completely new dynamic in terms of the jobs that people are looking for. And one of the questions we're going to need to ask ourselves is that new dynamic temporary or permanent? So we'll see. There's a question around correlation of the clusters. Outstanding question. The clusters are designed to not have any correlation, meaning that they live independently of each other. And they define if an individual is part of cluster 4, they cannot also be part of cluster 2 or cluster 3 in any way, shape, or form. And again, there's a lot of statistical theory behind that, but that is how these clusters are designed. Let me move on again as I see more questions come through, and we'll try to address a few more, but I do want to at least give you an inkling as to what I'm talking about here in terms of the short term. Again, we've applied 3 different data sources to our understanding of this particular moment in time right now, and this will bring us back to digital as well. One is our understanding of pre-existing jobs, what we've just been talking about. But we've also across this year been updating this understanding of jobs by conducting a new set of analysis during the pandemic to better understand the extent to which jobs have increased. We also, as I mentioned earlier, partnered with Slover Lynette and LaPlaca Cohen to do a survey of over 100,000 different arts buyers, which also helped us a little bit here. It's important to come back to one aspect of the job to be done analysis that we were talking about, which is as you remember all these jobs, the analysis, and this is real data, this is no longer hypothetical, okay? I'm sort of pulling the curtain back around some real findings. The number one job to be done, if you isolate it as an individual job, which again is not at the end of the day the goal here, but it's still interesting. The number one recurring job to be done is to see performances executed at the highest quality level, or exhibits presented at the highest quality level, or museums at the so on and so forth. Number one, by far. But here's what's really interesting. It's only 30%. In other words, only 30% of people are telling us that is the number one job. Isn't that what art is all about? It's about seeing things at the highest performance level possible. What about the other 70% who are saying that is not their primary motivator? Well, the interesting thing and the difficult thing is that the other 70%, there's no clear second and third winners here. It's very scattered. So yes, the next highest is to connect with something I'm passionate about, and close by is have an entertaining escape from the day-to-day. But there's no conclusion you can make from that, which is why it's so important to go further. We further exemplified and tried to understand these jobs again through the pandemic. And what we looked here is to try to identify if there were new jobs. And we arrayed them on this spectrum of urgency, needing to compare pre-pandemic. Is it more urgent now? Is it less urgent than before the pandemic? And how much are you relying on an arts organization to fulfill that particular job? So here are the findings. This is the new list of jobs to be done associated with the pandemic. And you'll see some new ones. There are definitely new ones. Give my kids a creative outlet, structure my time, confront important social issues, process my emotions. But the question is, they're kind of all over the place. So what does it mean for an arts organization? Well, there are three key messages that emerge in our minds. One, that cluster at the top left here, be entertained, enjoy familiar works, escape from the moment. That's a theme that is recurring here that they're looking for, but it's not necessarily more than before. What is more than before? Connect with others socially, connect with family and friends, connect with others, and be part of something larger. The recurring word here is connect. So how are we doing? How important is this to people during the pandemic? Well, again, this is the data you remember I started out with. What's important to people is, unfortunately, or fortunately, because we can't offer it, experiencing artworks and performances or specific performers in person. Now, we can offer a semblance of that through digital streaming of live performances, which is what 95% of all arts organizations are doing. So we have to ask ourselves, as arts organizations, how are we doing against the different jobs that people are looking to be fulfilled during the pandemic? Here's the result on that front. We've overlaid here in orange how well people are saying arts organizations are helping them fulfill that particular mission, that particular job. As to experiencing artworks, performances, or specific performers in person, people are saying arts organizations are doing a great job. Plenty of stuff out there. Digital streaming, so on and so forth. But look at the one that is most important to people: spending quality time with family or friends. It is the one that people are telling us we're doing the worst job against, where there's the biggest gap between what we are offering our audience members and the job they're looking for us to fulfill. So it's back to this question of connection. We are not doing a good job of providing them an answer to the number one thing that they most want right now. So that then begs the question, and again, I'm working through this really quickly, I know, is if all of this data is telling us that that is what customers want, what can we do about it? Should we throw our arms up in the air and say, well, of course we cannot provide them with connection with each other. It's not live. It's not, that is what we want to do normally. We want them to come as a family, experience something together. So maybe we should just say, let's focus on the things that we can do well through our use of digital and so on and so forth. Well, it is our belief that in fact, you can do quite a lot. And there are a number of arts organizations around the globe in various countries and various places that are investing in using digital to fulfill that particular job. And it would be our encouragement to you that as long as your doors remain closed or partially closed due to capacity constraints, that you think about how you can quickly re-engineer your digital strategy to fulfill that particular job. To help you along the way, we have done the work of looking around the globe at what organizations have been doing to fulfill that particular desire for connectivity. And again, I want to be clear about definitions here. This is not connectivity with artists. It is not connectivity with an arts organization. It is connectivity with each other, family members, friends, people to people. And we believe that the strategies that we have seen arts organizations employ here, largely through digital means, fall into 4 categories. And therefore, we would encourage you to go back to your organizations and to say, what am I doing in category 1? What am I doing in category 2? So on and so forth. Category 1 is sharing experiences together. Category 2 is collaboration. There are lots of organizations that have devised really innovative strategies to make people feel like they're collaborating. It could be competitions, socially sharing stories. And again, we can help you and provide you with lots of examples of these if helpful. The third category of type of connectivity is helping others. Lots of organizations have created digital strategies around the concept of being able to help others. And then finally, I love this one, understanding others, creating digital strategies that help you do that. So we are thrilled that there are, in fact, a lot of examples out there that if you as an arts organization are looking to increase the quotient of your digital investment in the short term that is about connectivity, there are answers. There are ways to do that. There are ways that audience members around the world have really been thankful to arts organizations for their ability to fill that job for them. So I'm going to begin to wrap up here, and I'm going to try to take a few more questions as we do this wrap up. As a reminder, we will make all of these slides available to you, and I do encourage you to reach out to me with questions and follow up, and I'll talk a little bit about that more in a minute. Here are some of the lessons learned I want to leave with you as we have traveled this quick but at the same time long path together, covered a lot of material, a lot of thoughts, a lot of things to hopefully take away. Traditional understanding of customers, traditional customer research is helpful but not sufficient. We believe that it does not tell us enough about the why people attend, why people visit, and that there needs to be a much bigger investment, and it does not have to be dollars, a much bigger investment in attention, in focus on why they are doing that. And we believe the Jobs to be Done framework is a very good one to help you do that, and it can be applied very easily to many organizations. Second lesson learned, we focus a disproportionate amount of our attention on the objective of seeing art performed at the highest level. But as we've talked about, more than 2/3 of arts patrons actually look to other jobs as being more important to them than that one in their decision to attend on a recurring basis an arts organization's offerings. Keep in mind that as you design strategies to build audiences, this is point number 3, many of the jobs that your audiences are hiring you to do are really not directly about the performance on the stage or the exhibit or the specific hall of your museum. It's about a lot of other things that we spend a lot less time typically thinking about. And our encouragement is you need to shift your mindset and spend a lot more time thinking about those other jobs that they are asking you to fulfill, that they are hiring you to do. Doing that involves understanding motivational segmentation. And the payoff from doing that is enormous, because again, as I talked about earlier, there are enormous opportunities for arts organizations to both retain their existing audiences, but also gain new ones by redesigning every aspect of their strategy around this motivational segmentation. By using micro-targeting, by using this different kind of understanding of customers, this is point number 5, we have a firm belief that strategies can be applied to truly redefine the investments that an arts organization make with a much, much higher return on investment and a more defined and understandable return on investment. So I'm going to take the last 10 minutes here to try to answer a few questions, but as I do so, I want to put a slide up here, the last one of my slides together, to remind you of my offer to answer any questions that you might have after the fact. Please write down my email address and reach out to me. And one of the things I want to put out there is this time I just spent with you, these last 90 minutes, you very generously devoted to this presentation. I would love to offer to bring them to your organization, to do a similar session privately for your team, if it would be helpful and interesting. If you want us to do that, we'd be happy to do it. No strings attached, no free of charge. We're trying to help arts organizations right now as much as possible. So if you want us to bring an adapted version of what we just did, or an extract of it, or something for your senior teams, please write to me, chris.denby@advisoryarts.com, and I'll be happy to organize that in the next few weeks, months, whatever the timing works for you. I'm happy to spend more time with you and your organization and your teams around this. If you want to join our newsletter, our weekly newsletter, or our every other week webinars, again, you can do so directly from our website, or you can write to me and I'll make sure to include you in all of that. And again, any questions or more information that you want about us or about what we've covered today, again, happy for you to reach out and ask me, so please do so. We've had some wonderful questions, which I hope we will continue to get on email and offline. But let me take a couple here as we have our final 6 or 7 minutes. I think there are a lot of technical questions, obviously, around how we do some of the analysis, and those I think would be good to address offline. Let me take a couple here. What is the best practice for jobs to be done, interviews to be conducted? Can it be done via focus groups or face-to-face interviews or a poll? Okay, definitely not a poll, definitely not focus groups. These conversations have to be one-on-one. They have to be long. Most jobs to be done interviews tend to be 1 to 2 hours in length. People have to be willing to devote that time, and you need to think very carefully, again, about how you're asking questions. This is almost about a psychological study more than it is typical market research, if you will. It's about really getting into the mind. And we typically, when we do them, and again, happy to help you structure them, when we do them, typically, we organize the discussion around one moment in time, one purchase. We ask them to think back to a moment when they made a decision to purchase a ticket or made a decision to visit a museum, free or not, and how did that decision process come about? Who was involved? What were the pieces of the decision process? Really dissect it. And then you extract lessons from that one case that you've learned from that particular individual. It's kind of like a peel the onion kind of approach. How do we get started to embark on clustering of audiences if we do not have a big data set of audiences to start with? You ask us. We are building the largest data set possible, and we want you to be able to reach out to us, and we can help you figure out how to structure that. I'll take one more question, and then I'll turn it back over to Winton to wrap us up or see if he has any other questions. How sure are we, when micro-targeting, that we are not misrepresenting the wants, needs, and desires of such micro-audiences? How sure that we got it right? Well, good question. That's what statisticians are all about, and I cannot pretend to tell you But if you ever heard of the concept of machine learning, that is what it's all about. It's about creating data sets that guarantee, in effect, the results in terms of the behavioral aspects of what we do. And if you're interested in learning a lot more about that, please let me know, and we can put you in touch with the right people who are experts in this field. Winton, we have, by my clock, 4 minutes left. How would you like to spend our last 4 minutes? Or I'll turn it over to you.
First of all, thank you very much for the very insightful and stimulating presentations. I do have a lot of questions, but I think my job to be done here is to let's say people to able to raise their questions too. So there's a few minutes. So if you want, I think that you see that there are questions also from the Q&A box and also from the chat room. If you want to take one or two more, I will time you out.
All right, sounds good. I'll take one or two. How can you engage a stranger in a museum to speak to you in such a deep way in such a short encounter? You cannot, right? You have to approach an individual who you think might be, you might ask, maybe in the moment, maybe they're attending a museum visit and you approach them and you say, would you be willing to do an hour interview? Not today, obviously, but at your convenience. We can do it over the phone. I can come to you, whatever you'd like. Maybe it's a patron that you have on your list that you know is a recurring visitor and you want to, interview that particular person. So you cannot do it in the moment and you cannot do it in a short encounter. It has to be deep, it has to be thoughtful, so on and so forth. Usually, how long does it take to analyze the survey collected from 5,000 patrons, and how big is the research team? Thanks for your advice. So our work is meant to set the core database that then any arts organization that wants to put their own data through it can do it. And that's a matter of days, weeks, perhaps at most, in terms of being able to marry a given arts organization's data with the global data set to be able to compare results and things like that. So the core research, of course, is much deeper than that. And it took us the better part of a year to actually create this and to do it with our data partners. And we are 95% of the way there, but it's a lengthy process. But once you've done the core work and built the insights and the infrastructure to then make it possible for a given arts organization to be part of that is a relatively simple effort. I think I have 1 minute left. I think, there seem to be a lot of questions about how do small arts organizations deal with this. And all I can tell you is there is no inability correlated with size. Any size organization can do what we have been talking about today in a variety of different ways. And again, reach out to me directly if you want more information. But do not fear that this is something that is only for the largest organizations. Anybody is able to do this, at least to some extent, to create sort of a breakthrough understanding.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. This is really insightful. And I think I'm really glad that as a psychologist myself to mention about, this is more like a psychologist study. And I think it's really interesting to have this jobs to be done approach. So to really get to know the audience much better, so beyond what they can articulate. And I think one thing I really like too is about understanding the competitors. So what you say about milkshakes, so competing with the bagel, competing with the Snickers, something like that. So we need to understand why. So people want arts to do for them, and if not, what other things could replace it. So understand better their motivations. And thanks for introducing to us the micro tagging. So basically how we can segment people into these motivational segments so we can reach them and to customize our marketing strategies to reach the very specific people. And thank you very much again. So we do hope to bring you to Hong Kong so you can really sample exotic food. And hope my job to be done is almost completed. And thank you again for joining us today. And we hope you all to enjoy the conversations as much as we do. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.